to combine the distributive property and multiplying monomials, then we might see something like this. I have the distributive property because I have a variable or value multiplying something inside the brackets, and I'm multiplying monomials because I have a variable value multiplying another variable value. So I'm going to get out my multiplication grid, and I'm going to get out some x tiles as well as some constant tiles. Okay, so I've got some tiles to work with. Now I'm going to need an x, and that's apparently how many groups I'm going to need. So I'm going to grab this x and stick it along the side, but then I also need to have groups of 2x minus 1. So I'm going to use a couple of the x's oriented in this direction. And I also need to have a negative 1, so I'm going to stick this in here. So it's really saying I need to create a rectangle that has a length of x and a width of 2x minus 1. So I'm going to need to create, what shape has a length of x and a width of x? Oh, that's going to be x squared. So I've got my x squared, but then I also need another length of x and a width of x. So I'm going to have a next x squared. And then finally, I have to have a length of x, but I have to have a width of negative 1. So if I'm going to have a negative x, then I need to have the white one. So this one is going to need to be oriented sideways in order to fit the length and width of the rectangle we're speaking of. But now when I multiply x times 2x minus 1, then I get this rectangle 2x squared minus x. So that's going to write as the result. So the algebra tiles give me the simplified version already. Oops, that's a 2x squared, and it's positive, then the x is negative. If I was going to expand and simplify, then I would use the distributive property to multiply. So I would get x times 2x, and I would multiply, and x times negative 1. X times 2x just gives me 2x squared, I recall, and x times negative 1 gives me the answer of negative x. Now we saw from a couple of different examples that if I'm adding a negative, that's the same as just subtracting. So I will actually simplify this to x squared minus x. So there's the algebraic representation for expand and simplify when we have to multiply an algebraic term by several algebraic terms. And here is the area representation with the algebra tile. Okay, so I can look at a second example, the negative a times 3a squared minus a. Notice that the bracket can't be simplified because a squared is going to be something similar to this green square, and a is going to be something similar to this negative x. We also recall that when we multiplied a squared by a, we wound up with a cube. So I'm going to use my distributive property here to expand and simplify. Multiplying negative a by the stuff inside, the 3a squared, and also multiplying negative a by negative a. So when I've multiplied negative a by 3a squared, because I have to take the sign with it because that tells me whether it's a positive or negative tile, then I have a times 3a squared. And I also have to distribute the multiplying of the negative a to the second term in the bracket, negative a. So I have negative a times negative a. If I multiply through then with my monomial rule, I'm going to remember to put a coefficient of 1 in front of the a, so it's actually a negative 1 coefficient, and the same is true for each of the negative a's. So then I remember that I multiply the coefficients together as well as the variables together. So I'm multiplying negative 1 times 3, and then I'm multiplying the a times the a squared. I will do the same idea, coefficients, negative 1 times negative 1, and variable times variable for our second. So negative 1 times negative 1, and a times a. So I happen to know that if I'm looking back in this section, negative 1 times 3 is negative 3, and a squared times a is a cubed. Then I can look through here, negative 1 times negative 1, that's 1, a times a, that's a squared. So I can write my answer negative 3a cubed, and that was a positive 1, so I can write 1a squared, or I can simply write without the coefficient of 1, negative 3a cubed plus a squared.